Hello, in this video I will show you how to run EHRServer from the Dockerfile in Docker. So I will show you first some of the configuration, because this is not straightforward. This is thought of the Docker to run the application, but you need to have some configuration on your host machine. To start, there are some environment variables in this file, in the application.yaml. This file can be found in Grails app conf application.yaml, and these variables that appears with the $sign and the curly braces are the environment variables. So I have these environment variables defined in my host machine. So for example, the database username and password are defined. I have them on my machine. It's not something that is defined in the Dockerfile or has to do with any Docker configuration. And those are needed for both running the application as development environment or as production environment. For this I need to do a little comment, because this production environment is not really a production environment, what you will think to run this in a production server with a production database. This is something internal. It is from Grails framework. Grails is the framework that we use to create EHRServer, and running in production, it means that the EHRServer is deployed to a Tomcat server, as any servlet container, but we use Tomcat, and that the code is compiled, and if you change the code, you need to recompile the code and build the WAR file to be deployed on Tomcat. That is production for Grails framework. So if you run in production, you also need some extra environment variables. That's it. The db create value, that could be create drop or update. Those values you can use. With the value create drop, it means for Grails to regenerate the database tables. It generates all the tables, all your database schema from the model defined in the framework, and when you stop EHRServer, it will drop all the tables and the data. If you set that value as update, it won't drop the database and won't regenerate the tables on startup. So it won't drop when you stop the application. So that is also an environment variable that you can set on your environment to tell EHRServer how to behave, or Grails how to behave when it does the startup process. And also the MySQL host and port and database name, also those should be set as environment variables. When you run in development, those are just hard-coded. You can change, of course, the configuration here, but it is hard-coded, and it is expected that you have MySQL running on your local machine on this port, that is the default port for MySQL, and that you have a database created with the name EHRServer 2. And development for Grails, it means that the code is recompiled each time you do a change. So that is very good for development, because if you do a change and you want to test that fast, you don't need to recompile the application. Grails just recompiles the files that you change and the changes are reflected in the application that is running. So you don't need to stop your application, compile it again and run it again to be able to test your changes. So we are going to have two Docker files, and I will show you one Docker file that runs EHRServer in this production environment and another that runs in development. So let's start with development first. So this Docker file here is taking the OpenJDK base image on the tag 8JDK. So for running the EHRServer on development, it needs to be JDK. So it needs the development kit. With the runtime, it's not enough. So and this will be Java 8 JDK. Then this line is because I read that some distributions of Linux have different commands for sh and bash. So this is basically removing the sh command and replacing that with a link to bash. So when you execute using bash or sh, it will use the same program. That is an issue in some new distributions of Linux. The next line is installing some packages that are needed, or some commands that are needed, that are git, zip and unzip. And zip and unzip are required by the next command. This command is installing SDK man, that is a library, or is a package management for mainly for Java development, and we use that to, for example, to run different versions of Grails, or even different versions of the Java JDK. But in this case, is the JDK comes in the initial image, so we don't manage Java using the SDK man, just Grails. And with this, we define an environment variable that will be the version that we will use of Grails. So the idea is when you need to update this, you can change this value, and we will do that when we update the EHRServer with new versions of Grails. And the next line basically initializes the installed SDK man, installing the previous line here, and then in the same command it installs Grails using the SDK command. So SDK is because we install the SDK man, and here it is installing Grails in the version that we specify here. Here we can remove this echo home. Basically this will be the root user, because we are running everything as root. The next line, because we are running as root, SDK was installed in the root folder. So when you install, for example, Grails, it will install Grails in SDK man, candidates, Grails, and then the Grails version. So we want to define that environment variable, because we will use that environment variable to redefine the path environment variable. Basically in the path we add the Grails home, that is this path /bin, to be able to find the Grails executable. With that, this could be removed, but because I couldn't make it work really, so this might be removed. Also the echo path, this could be removed also, and this next line also could be removed. This is just debugging, trying to check if Grails was there, because I was running on some issues and Grails was not found. The only way that I could run Grails that I found that works is basically specifying the whole path to Grails. So this is what I tried to do here with the path, but here I'm specifying the full path to the Grails program, and this is the executable, and this is just running to get the version of Grails, trying to check if Grails is installed correctly. Yeah, so if you get some output here, it should be this version, Grails 3.3.10. Yeah. So most of these lines could be removed, are not important for running the image, just to check everything was there. So here it comes one of the things that you need to consider when running EHRServer from the Dockerfile is that you will run this from your copy of the EHRServer GitHub repository. Yeah. So the idea is that you need to, here you have your local clone of the repository. Here I have mine. So this is basically git clone, and then the URL from the repository, and then you have this here. So this is the Grails program. So instead of the EHRServer program, that is basically a Grails application. So what we do here is we run Docker from here, because we have the Docker files here. So let me go back to the Dockerfile. This is copying everything on this folder, the current folder, to /EHRServer on the image. Yeah. So basically we are copying the whole repository that we have here on the image. We could, yeah, and that we tested on another Docker file, and in fact it makes really no need of having Git installed here, because we are not using Git. But the alternative of copying the local repository to EHRServer is an alternative to actually doing a Git clone in the image. So you can actually get the Git repository in the image, and there is no need of copying this. But why do we have this here? Because you already have the repository locally, because you downloaded it to actually be able to access these Docker files. So one, you already did this download. You don't need to do this again. And another thing is, if you do any changes to the code, you want that updated code to be copied to the image, to run the application, including your change. Yeah. So with this we have that. Then we set the working directory in the image to be EHRServer. So it's where we have a copy of our repository. And then we are exposing, this is not really needed because we are running, I will show you in a second, we are running on the host network, so we are not really exposing anything from the image or from the container when it's running. This we can remove because it's doing just a clean before the application runs, and this actually runs Grails run up. And this is all what you need to do to be able to run EHRServer. Now I have the container running. Actually, this is the command that you need to execute to run the development image. So you have a running container. Yeah. First you need to build it, and then here is Docker build -t. This adds a tag to the image. yeah, and is creating the image, building the image from dockerfile.div2, yeah, from local, yeah. So I will execute this. It is fast because everything is cached, but you can see, for instance, here we have the when you run this for the first time, you should see, for instance, the outputs of this command. Right now is not getting any output because it is everything is cached, yeah. But you will have the outputs of these echoes, for instance, yeah. And then what you have that image build, yeah. And how do you know that image was built correctly? I have Portainer installed. This is very useful. If you go to images, you should see here, I don't see the tags to the images, but should be one of these. Yeah, here you can see run up Grails, so it should be that image, yeah. And you can see here the environment variables that I defined there. So this is the image that was just generated. So for the containers, this is not running, this is from previous runs, so I will just remove this. Yeah, I have the Portainer because Portainer is also a container running, so it's just for managing the containers. And here, to run actually the application, you need to do docker run. Then with this network host, it will take the current network. It won't generate a new network. It will create the network as it is just another machine on your network, yeah. So that is why the expose port is not needed on the Dockerfile. I shall show you. Then it will take some environment variables from this docker env file, and the name of the container will be EHRServer, and this will run the container with the tag EHRServer dev. Yeah, and if you remember, EHRServer dev is the tag that I added with the -t. Yeah, so before doing that, I will show you the docker env file. Docker env is this. So this, you can see I am not defining the values of these environment variables. That is because when you don't specify, and this is something from Docker, when you don't specify the values, it will take the environment variables from your machine, from your host machine. So I have all these environment variables set in my host machine, yeah, and I will explain what they are. Yeah. If you want more information, there is a guide of the EHRServer that I recommend you to read before doing anything of this. But there is a section that especially documents the meaning of each of these environment variables and where and how they are used. This EHRServer MySQL database username and password are used here in the application YAML configuration file, where the connection to the database is specified. So you know these two. And these that say EHRServer email port from user pass, those are environment variables that are for configuring the email server. So this will be the SMTP server to send emails out, and these are used for managing users on EHRServer. Yeah, so when you configure your EHRServer, you need to set this up. You can use Gmail SMTP, you can use a cheap PHP MySQL host that has an email server, or you can use any email service online that are free for low levels of emails, and for testing that is enough. But this is required because when you create a new user in EHRServer, it will send that user an email to reset the password. So we are not creating passwords from the user interface. That is not safe to do. That is why we use email. So if you want someone to have a user in the system, that person should be the only one setting their own password, yeah, and resetting if they want to change the passwords, yeah. So there is no admin that knows the passwords of other admins in the application, yeah. Then the EHRServer REST secret. This is used to generate REST API tokens when someone authenticates using the REST API. It will use the token to identify the server basically that is generating that token. So if you have two EHRServers, you need to define different REST secrets. So this can be any value. It could be a string, could be a UUID, whatever you want, but should be different. If you keep them the same, when a user authenticates on the EHRServer 1, it could authenticate on the EHRServer 2 with the same token, if the user exists with the same username in both servers. So there should be some extra coincidences. Yeah, but you need to change this up, and in the guide it is explained. And then we use an external service to process clinical data queries, and this is to process SNOMED CT expressions. Yeah, so you need a key for that, and also on our repository on the guide we have a value, so you can use that for testing purposes. It has limitations. For example, it has a top number of requests that you can do daily. Yeah, for testing purposes is more than enough. Yeah. So let's execute. As I said, this should take my environment variables to run. So I will run this machine that I just built, and this will run the container. Yeah. So right now it should be running Grails. So it should be Grails will run the application with the command Grails run app, and that application will run in development mode. Yeah. So this is something that Grails starts doing. If you install Grails on your system, it will do the same. And the steps that we follow to install Grails in the image are the same steps that you need to install Grails on your local machine. So if you don't want to use Docker, you can follow the same steps on your local machine. Another comment: we didn't configure any database in the Dockerfile, and that is why this installation is not straightforward and is not auto-contained in the Docker image. The thing is, you need to have MySQL server installed in your host machine. That is why we also use network hosts. Yeah, if you check my machine, let's start. If you check my machine, I have here running on my machine MySQL. Yeah. So you need to run MySQL in your host machine, and with the network equals host of the container, it will make actually EHRServer to connect from the Docker container to your local MySQL instance that is running. Yeah, and if you receive this, is because EHRServer is running. Grails was able to resolve all the dependencies and was able to connect to your host database. Yeah, And also, why do we want the database to be on the host? Because this is for development. You need to have access to the database, and when you do something in EHR base, in EHR server, you need to sometimes you need to check the database to see any data changes, so you can check there. So for instance, if I go, also this says that this is running on localhost 8090. Since we have network equal hosts, this 8090 should be on my normal network, so I don't need any ports forwarded from the container. First, I will show you import container. If I update the containers, you will see another container running EHRServer dev, because this is the name, and runs from the image that has the tag EHRServer dev. Yeah, so that is great. A couple of things that you can do from here. Here you can see the logs. So this is just the logs from the console. Yeah. And let's go to localhost 8090, and here we should see EHRServer login. Yeah. And if I use the default username and password, this should be admin@Cabolabs, and password should be admin. This is just the default when you run the application, and we are in, and everything should be working. Yeah, and should be empty also, because you don't have anything. You just have one sample organization. Organization is like a hospital, for example. Health records, that should be empty. These are EHRs. Contributions, there are changes to the EHRs, are empty. Also, we don't have any queries. Templates, we have the default templates. These templates are just for testing and are contained in the base OPTs folder, and that is also taken from your repository. So if you go to OPTs, you will see here that we have a base OPTs here, and those templates will be loaded in the application, so you have some templates to play around. So these are OpenEHR templates, basically clinical document definitions following the OpenEHR standard. And then, so this is working, this is okay. Okay. So this is the other Docker file that we have, and this Docker file is running the application in production mode. In the production, as I said, from the Grails perspective, this is not a production ready server, because it doesn't have a database, it doesn't have security checkups, etc. So just consider that. But this is good, for example, if you want to create a local environment with EHRServer running, and you want to use it just for testing some stuff, for example, to store some information, then to query the information, then integrate some data sources, external data sources, pushing information in, and then you have another application that actually does analysis over the data that is compliant with the OpenEHR standard. You can create that environment by running this machine. And this machine, I won't run it. I will just show you the Dockerfile, because this video is taken too long, but the process will be the same, yeah, for building and running the image and running the container. So this is a multi-stage. So first, this is adapted from a file that some people, we have a couple of people that actually created and updated this file. contributors for the open source project. So this is a multi-stage file. First, it takes this image, the OpenJDK Alpine, that is a very minimal version of Linux. It's very small, and this adds a name or a tag to it. So we have here Alpine Linux use APK to install programs and commands, etc. So here is installing wget and zip and git, and then is using wget to actually, this is an alternative way to install Grails, is actually downloading Grails from its source repository. It's not using SDK man to install it. It's just downloading the zip with the binaries. And the next line is unzipping the zip and putting Grails into the OPT folder. Next, it is defining the Grails home environment variable and is adding that to the path. This is the line that I couldn't make run or work in the development Dockerfile. But this seems to be okay here. Then it is saying that the working directory will be /app. And this is doing what I told you that could be done, is using git to clone the EHRServer repository, and is cloning in the current directory. The current directory, because this is under the working directory /app, will be /app. So EHRServer is actually cloned to /app in the image, because this is building the image. And then this command is actually running Grails, and you can see this is like the path that we have in the Dockerfile, in the other Dockerfile. It's actually running Grails, and we have here running Grails. So there is the full path to Grails, to the Grails command. Here's Grails and here's Grails, and it's running war. War is actually taking the application in the current folder, because it is running on the current folder that is the working dir, that is /app, where EHRServer was cloned to. So it's there in /app, and is running Grails war over that folder. Since that is a Grails application, it will compile the application using Grails, and will package the application in a war file. That is actually a Java web application. And that is the build phase, or stage, because this is multi-stage. And the second stage will actually get the image from Tomcat with this tag OpenJDK 8, and this will have Tomcat server installed. So here I have added this emp Catalina ops. This is how you pass the options to Tomcat. Tomcat is the Catalina server. It's another name for Tomcat, and this is the way I found that works to send to that Tomcat these variables: the db create, the data source URL, the data source username, and the data source password. And why is that we need all of those? Because on the application YAML, right now we are running on production, so we need to pass EHRServer username and password for the database, but we also need to send the data source db create value, and this is the way -d in uppercase, then data source db create is like data source dot db create. So it's actually accessing this, or it's not really accessing this. This is because the Spring Boot framework, because Grails runs on Spring Boot. So there are a lot of frameworks here, and it's actually doing some magic. If you pass a variable with the name or the path of the variable that you want to set here, it will set the value for you. So we are doing create drop here, but we can also use update. Yeah, as I told you, we can change this. So this will be set to create drop. The data source URL will set this option here. Yeah, and then as I told you, the password and username. Yeah, so this is just to pass some variables to Tomcat. Then the next line is actually getting from the build image, and the build is this stage because it is called build. So from that image, we'll copy everything from the /app/opts/base opts. So it's basically this folder that I showed you before. Yeah, but we'll take that folder instead of the local copy of the repository. It will take that from the image that was built here, that is named build. Yeah, so it will take that and we'll copy that to the current image to the same location. So the current image is this one with Tomcat, and we'll do the same with the var that was built here. We'll take that var because we just ran the var, we build and package the var, but we didn't do anything with that var. So we'll get that var from that image and we'll copy that into the folder that we know that Tomcat is installed. So it seems that the documentation says that Tomcat will be installing user local Tomcat. Then Tomcat has a folder that is the standard folder for deploying the web applications, and that is web apps. And when you put any var there, it will be extracted and will be deployed as a web application. If you put that as root.var, it will run in the root folder. Yeah, or in the root URL. So if you access localhost 8080 on that machine, slash, and that's it, it will look for this application root. Yeah, and the next line is copying the application YAML to app config. So it's taking the configuration from there. So it is like a way to externalize the configuration. And then it is saying everything should work from /app. Yeah, and then it is exposing the 8080 and is running Catalina sh run. This is actually the executable of the Tomcat server. So when you run this, it will run Tomcat server and will deploy anything that is inside the folder web apps of Tomcat, anything that ends with var. Yeah, this expose is not really needed because if you run this with the option network equals host, it will run in the 8080 on your local network. It will be just like a process in your local machine, but it is running in the Docker image. Yeah. And also you need to run this with your local MySQL, because this is doesn't have anything about MySQL configuration, and also will run with the Dockeremp file. You need to pass this. So these other environment variables are taken into account. Actually, I think if you pass these two here, you don't need, I didn't test that, but I think you don't need these two options here. This username here and the password here, but I didn't test that. Yeah, so this is just my local MySQL, my user and password for my local MySQL for development purposes. So you build this and then you run with the same commands that I show you how to run build and run the version for development. Yeah, that is the Dockerfile dev2. The Dockerfile dev1, this version I couldn't make it run. Yeah, it has some problems. I tried to start from Ubuntu, but didn't work. So I started again, and you can see the differences from the second version to this first version. Yeah, for instance, I wasn't able to actually run this here, the SDK man. I had problems running that and installing Grails, and I wanted to also install Java from SDK man, and that wouldn't work. So this I will delete later and will keep this development2 file. I will rename this to developments only, and then we need to update we have another file that I didn't test yet, but we will update this very soon. Yeah, this is a Docker Compose file that actually creates, as you can see, an image for MySQL. So this is actually running EHRServer on one container and MySQL on another container, and those are communicated. Yeah, and those don't use the host network, use the Docker network to communicate between them. Yeah, so and this it seems that currently is not working, but we have a contributor that actually updated this file. So I need to test what he updated and maybe merge his pull requests if everything works as expected. So for this is still in my opinion not production ready, not production. Yeah, it needs some assurance on the security, for example. Also, I wouldn't use for instance passwords here. I would use environment variables for the passwords, and we need to be sure that the security checkups on the MySQL image are done. I didn't read the documentation of this MySQL image. For MySQL, it comes with a default user, with a default database, for testing with some data. So when there is a command that you run inside MySQL the first time that you install MySQL and you want that to be a secure server, that is a script to secure your MySQL installation. So I need to be sure that this image is actually running that, or be sure that we need to add some commands here to ensure that is working okay. Also for the web server, for running the EHRServer, what we need to do for a real production environment, we need to add SSL certificates. So we need to secure that server, and I want that to be to have the certificates created by default. So when you access, actually it is creating the certificates. I need to test that a little bit, because I don't think it allows you to generate certificates for local hosts. Maybe self-signed certificates it will work, but I guess you need a domain really to make that work. So with a little tweaking, maybe you can define a local fake domain, and you can we can get actually a certificate for that domain. But the process to update the certificate actually needs a fixed IP, or at least some kind of service that makes the server that provides the certificates access to your machine to do some tests and then to provide the certificate. So I need to check that out to see if that will work or not. Or maybe we consider this to be production ready Docker files, and we create a guide on how to secure your server on top of what you can do on Docker containers. So we need to think about that a little bit. We already did configurations of production servers manually, so you can actually do all that work manually, but the idea is to be able to use Docker as much as possible, to automate as much as possible, so you just run one command and you have almost everything that you need to be able to run this on the internet, actually running a public service with EHRServer. So we need to test everything and check at which extent we can use Docker containers to create a production environment that we feel comfortable to work with, and that we provide, of course, support for it. If you have any questions, any suggestions, or you want to contribute to this Docker work, this is a little bit of researching, a little bit of learning, and a little bit of testing. So you are welcome to comment, to contribute. We have an online community, so you can get here on Gitter. This is actually an open source community, so it's gitter.im/kawalabs/EHRServer. Yeah, this is actually the chat for our Git repository for the EHRServer. So here we have a lot of people asking questions, making comments, suggestions. We have a lot of people here, a lot of movement. The community is really healthy. So if you have any comments, you're welcome here, and you can comment or ask any questions here. And of course, if you want to download this, you can go to the repository that is GitHub. This is my username. This is me actually, and this is Kawalabs EHRServer, and you can clone from here. Yeah, there you will have the Docker files. These Docker files are not yet updated. I will push commit soon so you have those Docker files to play with. So yep, any questions, comments, suggestions, contributions are very welcome. Hope you find this video useful, and just let me know if anything comes up. If something doesn't work, just let me know. Yeah, thank you and goodbye. Ciao ciao.